I'm going to record. So yes, we're embracing principle 6, and such an important principle that its icon is the earthworm. I could pull out a pithy Darwinian quote, but of course I haven't prepared that. But I'm holding here Darwin on Humans and the Earthworm, Charles Darwin, that bloke from Shrewsbury. They're going to open up his home, aren't they? There's a museum or something, I think, I heard.
It's just changed hands under very suspicious circumstances.
Is that right?
It didn't go to market at all, and it sold very cheap.
Beg your pardon?
So who knows?
Darwin on Humans and the Earthworm.
Tim Jones is even. Tim Jones has been in Nick Wells MEP, I think.
All right.
Same Tim Jones, he was DBRW, one of the popular words.
Okay.
It's a very strong promoter of wind power, and then he was a very strong presence.
None of those is their minor.
Didn't change, I think it's
So we have a wonderful part of our sort of local heritage is that the famous naturalist and the guy who decoded evolution, Charles Darwin, lived and spent a lot of his life in the nearby town to here in Shrewsbury. Yep.
Lots of other people were working at the same time, weren't they?
He was a very, very astute guy, I think, and the thing is, he sat on his foundings and didn't publish for several years because his wife was deeply religious, and he was he didn't want to upset her sensibilities around sort of the creationalist myth, you know. But yes, and other people were getting. He published because he realised that the race was on. So yeah, very, very interesting bit of history. And as we talked about the other day, is he only ever saw a very small part of the evidence and was able to deduce the rest and made predictions which turned out to be accurate, you know, over 100 years later and stuff like that. So it was interesting. In his earlier deliberations on the natural world, he became fascinated with the earthworm and saw it as one of the key sort of species within the natural world because it's such a powerful habitat creator. And I think, I'm speculating now actually, but I think part of the insight was that realization when what we call succession, but about how the actions of one species then open up niches and potentials for others. In this context, so in Principle 6, the statement is produce no waste. And the saying is waste not, want not. And that's such a challenge, especially in our throwaway, materialistic, Western economic paradigm. We're all about waste. Waste is what we do. So this is challenging to us. It's also somehow a mind shift if nature does not produce waste, and we are a waste-producing organism, there's an awful lot of opportunity because we're failing to see the potentials in things by chucking them away. Or I can't quite get my head around the plastic thing, but somehow we've got to edit that out of our behavior completely because we've also got into... It's intrinsic within our market mechanism is the more you can package something, the more valuable it seems and the more money people are prepared to pay for it.
So, you now get paper bags in supermarkets to put the veg out. I mean, why would that take so long? You know? It's not a no-brainer, isn't it? It's just a way.
Somebody, I've always got to think slightly wrong way around because I've always put it that, look, basically, if you're processing lots of oil, you end up with these other distillates from the oil. So basically the plastic's free. It's like a byproduct. It's a waste from the oil processing process. I don't know if I'm exactly correct in saying that. Someone else more recently said to me, no, the plastics is the profit end. That's where they make a lot of the money. And so again, that would be a huge perhaps potentially a huge challenge to the petrochemical oil distillation world to lose some of the market for plastics, because that seems to be where they are making a lot of the money. But I mean, it's also the thing, just microplastics is enough to finish us all off. It's that, and you know, I'm sure you've seen these stories now where they're finding microplastics in the snow above settlement lines. We talked about when water evaporates, that evapotranspiration, water evaporating off the surface of plants, taking up, you know, bacteria and bits of DNA and bacteriophage and other bits of stuff, dust particles. It's also taking bits of plastic. And these are now migrating everywhere. Plastic problem in Uganda is utterly appalling. Stuff's everywhere. And people are becoming almost blind to it because it's so ubiquitous. So I think that's one of our really great challenges.
Well, actually, this is one of the things about COVID, I don't know, but it's like, since austerity, councils don't pick up litter anymore. And there's been litter, I mean, I'm not sure this has been part of it, litter absolutely everywhere. Suddenly, litter pickers everywhere. Over in Spalding, it's like if they see a bit of litter, they're like bashing each other in the head with litter pickers to get to it first.
Yeah.
So I mean, that's. I know it's not stopping the problem at source, but at least it's.
There's been a public response, hasn't there? But also there's an intergenerational thing, isn't there? Because we seem to have produced a younger generation in the UK right now where it's really not cool to put stuff in a bin. And not only that, is everything, those people as consumers are buying the hyper packaged products.
Well, they've been conditioned.
They've been absolutely.
They are consumers. They've been.
They've been.
Particularly the teenagers. I think teenagers. Sort of seen as a market. So therefore, create divides between teenagers, their parents, and that other generation.
Yes. They want to
hive them off and make them consumers.
They want to.
Teenager.
They're defining themselves through their consumption. That's very much a part of.
I think those things, an awful lot of the younger generation are an awful lot greener than my generation.
Right, yes.
I mean, certainly, my children and their friends, they don't put stuff in the bin because they don't produce it in the dustbin
Right.
to put it in the bin.
Right.
And that's the extreme of one lot who are hyper consumers, but I do think as a generation, they are growing up to be an awful lot more aware than we were.
Yeah.
But then I guess a lot of them are very aware that feel completely helpless. So
What age are we talking? You when you say that, Molly? What age are you referring to? Really, what age group?
My youngest is 18, so 18 into 20.
Okay, all right. Because we've had all those images. I mean, I sort of have my own thoughts about that. We've had all these images in the media of, oh, everyone's gone to a park for the day and then they've left it knee deep in trash.
Quarry Park in Shrewsbury.
Yeah. But then all the great and the good go up and pick it up the next day. So where's the learning? Where's the feedback? I don't know, because it's not cancelling out that behaviour if everybody just ties up.
They'll have no pocket money the next week.
Yes.
I think it probably is though, because it's not the council people that much anymore. It's other people who are seeing other people do it. So I think the message will, that people are giving up their time to pick it up. I think the message maybe.
And I do notice there's lots of people on social media who are showing pictures of, I stopped at this picnic spot and I picked up all this trash and here's a photo of me. And I don't know, is that virtue signalling or is that people? No, it's good. People are doing the right thing. I think it probably does send a positive message.
I think it does. Especially when people are going out with their young children as well. So those children are growing up as listeners rather than listeners. And other children are seeing them do that.
I get this thing about, this coffee. Coffee's become such a thing that it didn't used to be. Coffee was just a drink. Now it's like almost a religion, and it's every third shop's a coffee shop. And you get a big cardboard cup, then that's got a little hot, ring around it so you don't scald your fingers, and it's got a plastic lid on it, and then it has a wooden stirrer that comes with it, and you get a napkin, and you get a little sachet of sugar to put into it. It's like, how much trash is there for one person to have a cup of coffee? That's like about 5 items.
I was on a train the other day and I had like one of those little flask mugs, and of course I drank tea, I sat out, so I went to in Birmingham used to go out to get it filled back up again. And it's like we you guys do it, we can't do that.
That's since COVID. It's been
Yeah, no, it's no starting to happen, wasn't it?
Mm.
It's the reaction to COVID, so our school got
Oh.
first place. And I went to second place, I said, yeah, but we'll have to put it in the flats. But then, you know what, why couldn't I just have a jug?
Mm.
Yeah, make it in a jug and then pour it into some.
Well, because again, capitalism is everything's been reduced to simple steps. This is how you make a coffee. You take this container, not your container, this one, the one that has McDonald's logo on it, whatever it is, Starbucks logo on it. It's been fits the machine and all of that, and is however many ounces of coffee you're supposed to have. All of that prescription.
Yeah.
No one's allowed to think for themselves, improvise. What if you actually got an extra gram of coffee that wasn't, because your cup wasn't the standard size? I mean, imagine how terrible that would be.
Yeah, well, I don't see anyway. Religion. All my life.
Yeah.
Well, I've got a sort of schism though, where I'm getting on to half the population thinks that's the definition of civilization.
Yes. No.
That's the real thing that needs change.
Yeah. But again, it's because we're being literally marketed. We're being programmed to think in one way whilst being told, climate change, rubbish in hedges. And it's a total sort of schizophrenia almost.
We've got to recover from COVID by destroying the planet.
Yeah.
Basically, that's what I've been hearing on the radio. We've got to get the pubs open, we've got to get people indoors.
Well, Britain's running out of lager. I heard that on the news today. Everyone's sinking pints like there's no tomorrow. They open the pubs up now. And
one of the biggest supporters of lockdown are the companies that benefit from small business being pushed.
That's right. Yeah, because then
Amazon loves lockdown and stay safe. And stay indoors at all times. All you can do is Amazon.
very worrying. Well, yeah, no, it is. I mean, obviously, these big corporates have done very well, but it's again back to disaster capitalism and vulture capitalism. These are opportunities for them. No. Look.
I think also there's opportunities here, like during that time, I read loads of those posts. It would have been much easier to go on World of Books and Amazon and to read my books. Actually, I made a point of buying a book that would cost me more money, which meant I didn't get my book as quickly, but the book could still be open because I love that shop.
Yeah.
And on the support book. So it's also where we put our money as consumers, and we talk to you about that. Someone said I bought this.
Yeah, it is down to us, because whatever capitalism is, I had this conversation, I think it was Jeremy the first night. Whatever capitalism is and whatever it results in depends on what we consider to be capital. Whatever we assign value to, eventually people are going to start trying to appeal to. So net, for example, net wildlands, at the end of the day, that's still capitalism. They still own that land and it's still private and it's still market. But people will start wanting that now because culture's pushing people in a more ecological direction. So people are paying money now to experience nature. I know there's going to be people there that like sort of make this kind of try and just like rip that off a bit or make it a bit cheap. But whatever capitalism results creates, it just depends on what we consider to be capital, what we consider valuable, and what we're willing to pay a lot of money for.
I understand what you're saying, and we'll go into this in a different lecture. But if you're the chief executive of a public company, your responsibility is to maximise shareholder return and nothing else. Yeah. That's the problem. So you'll then, if wrapping your product in 5 layers of plastic is more profitable than 3.
But if consumers don't demand plastic anymore, and consumers are more ecologically minded, then shares, plastic won't be profitable anymore, so shareholders won't buy that anymore. If we as consumers consider capital to be something else, and we start paying more for regenerative beef, like Sheffield Farm is still capitalism, it's still privately owned, it's still a business. If people start assigning value to ecological functional things, then eventually the market, the people creating things, are going to have to start. Yeah.
Let us hope so. I mean, you need very, very informed consumers who are not being blanketly lied to and manipulated through, media and advertising and commercials and product placement and all of that,
But it's like you go to, you need alternatives as well, don't you? Because if you are sort of, if you're doing 40-hour week or whatever, you're going to do, your partner's doing 40-hour week, you've got to get to the supermarket, get food, and you don't, it's so it's fractional.
Demand and things you can create that.
You've done that.
And then also remember, we don't have long. We are already in this sort of state of that. The Paris Climate Agreement began on the 1st of January 2020, where we're already into that time period of this is our last chance sort of thing. So anyway, sorry, it's good to have this chat. I'll go back to the principle though, just to get through what we are here to do. So what a big subject, what an enormous thing to begin thinking about, the waste not, want not, and how we really start to bring that into your own reckoning and start, in terms of everything that you're doing. So now when it comes to the design bit, where the opportunities lie, where we as permaculture designers, whatever, can set things in motion is all your opportunities lie in the waste stream. There's resources just lying around everywhere that people are failing to see the value of. So there's your challenge. Everything. I mean, so many things. Yes, we will be looking at that, at composting toilets in a minute, as an example, really. But also yesterday we looked at a 200-year-old farm with a bunch of buildings that aren't really good for anything unless you have a completely different vision. They're good for lots of things, but they're not very good for farming. And seeing as it's a farm, those buildings have been underutilized for decades because you can't put modern machinery in them and access and what have you. So by seeing the potential of, we could repurpose this as a community and create a totally different kind of farm, that vision comes from seeing the value in the waste in those old buildings, because they've got planning permission to turn those into houses or into residential. So that's visionary by looking into the waste stream, right? Just to relate to yesterday. So the earthworm is a suitable icon for this principle because it lives by consuming plant litter, which we might consider a waste, which it converts into humus that improves the soil environment for itself, for soil microorganisms, and for plants. Thus, the earthworm, like all living things, is a part of a web where the outputs of one are the inputs of another. Inputs and outputs. So again, we looked at our little chicken diagram the other day and we thought about all of the other actions and behaviors, the inputs and outputs that might be coming from around a chicken population. And then so as designers, what we want to do is actually think about where each one of those outputs is going, because that potentially then can be harvested and channeled and put into the next system. So the chickens are, the straw, the bedding, maybe the heat, the carbon dioxide, the feathers, all of the different things that are going on around there, all potentially are a yield. The fact that they scratch and turn, that they selectively peck out grubs and insects, it's all there to be harvested. The proverb, waste not, want not, reminds us that it is very easy to be wasteful when there is an abundance, but that this waste can be the cause of later hardship. So don't take things for granted when they're abundant, and don't think that we're always going to be in a time of abundance. We live in a time of abundance that might not carry on. Or it might re-express itself as a different kind of abundance. The opportunities to reduce waste and in fact live from waste are historically unprecedented. Now, especially in the first world, especially in the Western world, the overdeveloped world, we're surrounded by waste. But even in the refugee settlements in Bidi Bidi in 2018, when I first went there, I went there in the dry season in February, and all I could see was black. The whole landscape was on fire. They were burning off all the grasses, and they were not valuing them because they had lots of them. Big, tall, dry grasses. They feared maybe animals or probably bushfire, so they did control burning to get rid of it all. And then I tried to point out to them, no, that's your basic resource that you're going to use to build the soil you're going to feed yourself with. Where you have a lot of something, it's very hard to value it. It's a thing. In the past, only the most destitute made a living from waste. Today, we should acknowledge those who creatively use waste as the very essence of living lightly on the earth. Opportunities often lie in the waste stream, and spotting potential in these things, in the things others throw away, creates huge advantage. Elements to grow together to build effective systems.
That just makes me think about toast ale, which the surname Christian, he set up an organisation called Food Bank.
Oh, was that the pig guy?
When he was getting bothered about all the waste, like stale bread.
Right.
And so he's made, set this up where he makes ale from the bread. And the label is toast ale.
One wrote in this article about pet food, sustainable pet food. It's fascinating. It's like lots of us think about the way we feed ourselves and stuff, but very few people are thinking about the way they feed their dogs and cats. And of course, in some spheres there isn't that much waste because meat and animal derivatives fall straight into. But look at the labels; they'll tell you anything. It's such a deep subject, but it's very, very interesting. But it's like people have not translated to their pets, and obviously, as we start eating more of the animal, because it's like nobody eats it, and we're regulated, and we're trolled from brains and whatever. What are the dogs and cats kind of eating? It's a kind of and yet nobody's really, and I don't really think. I mean, people are thinking about it.
We're talking about pet food, the food that we buy to feed domestic animals. Yeah, no, it's true. So it's made out. Pet food's made out of the stuff that we're not eating.
Lots of it isn't really wasted. At the end of the day, dogs domesticate themselves through scavenging. They're a social scavenger. So essentially, they're still eating the same stuff.
Yeah.
But it's kind of
a bit more processed.
Slightly different. They're not actually scavenging.
Somewhere along the way, they got into different something as well.
We need something like 20% of bread stores in supermarkets actually sold.
80% of supermarket bread is wasted.
It goes over, it's not bought because they have to keep the shelves full.
Supermarkets don't work, do they?
No.
I'll tell you what, there's a food hub in Shrewsbury. Amazing. And it's building community, because that's the thing, isn't it? That's how you make change in building community. The food hub is not.
Tell me, what is the food hub in Shrewsbury? You said.
Anderson and Alan Thomas.
Oh yeah.
So they're basically tapping into the waste stream from supermarkets, and then you've got people in various communities around town that pick it up and then put it outside their houses.
Okay, so this is. They're taking waste food out of that from the domestic sphere rather than from the commercial sphere. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, it's really amazing because what's amazing more than anything is the way it's seeding community.
Yeah. Just building relationships between people.
Relationships, yeah. Because I think there's probably 3 in our area, so we've really got about how many houses have we got? 300 houses. So we've got 3 people doing it. So they go outside their house, and then it's going on WhatsApp groups and Facebook groups, and people are turning up. Some people take everything. I don't agree on to do it. One person just takes everything I put out there. And other people are obviously much more measured, but it's absolutely brilliant. And I think the unseen, it is the community.
Yeah. Yeah. So just tell us a bit more. So you, Ben does this OzNosh thing.
So they get at the supermarkets there first, and they do at the moment they do meal deliveries, but 4 days a week to meal service.
So he's like a proper pucker chef, and he's taking food waste from commercial sources.
And make them super nice food.
Yeah.
And then they do boxes, it's like food box.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
But then the dogs have been eating all the bent carrots for all these years. So when the people start eating the bent carrots, what the dogs will do. And it is, you know, this is what I'm trying to look at. It is fascinating.
But yeah, I mean, our food system is really, really broken, and it's in part because it's about profit maximization, and it's in part because food's traveling really, really long distances to get to market. All of those are wastes. All of those are kind of opportunities that could be, you know, for improvements in the market. And it seems that the markup on food is so high that it doesn't matter if large quantities of it are literally just landfilled, and it really pains me, especially the amount of carbs that are thrown away, because it seems like bread and rice, and people always cook too much, and spaghetti, pasta, they always seem to cook too much of it and chuck a whole bunch of it away. And you think that's the backbone energy that's keeping half of the planet alive. And we're so, you know, wasteful with it.
China just declared war on food waste and overeating.
Yeah.
The empty plate.
Yeah.
A bit like the Americans declare war on drugs, that would.
Yeah, that worked well. Yeah.
Well, I'm afraid the Chinese thing probably will do that.
That guy Tristan. So interesting. You mentioned Katie Anderson. So she used to work for a project called Zero Waste or Zero Waste in a Box or something, which was connected to Kumhari. So we used to work together.
Yeah, no.
So, yeah. And
she's got paid. Well, so I think Ali and
yeah.
Katie are paid. So
Yes, to do that. Yes, it's that. That's. She's been talking about doing this course for about 10 years. So maybe one day we'll get her on it.
Yeah.
You mentioned that guy Tristan, and I'm sure I've come across him before, ORFC, quite a few years ago, and he did a pig swill project before, and I've got a picture of a pig up on the screen. So there's all sorts of complexities around that, and obviously we had the foot and mouth thing here, and you can't feed like slops, you know, mixed food waste can't go to pigs. But in some countries like Vietnam or somewhere, they do that, and they pasteurize it in some way. I'm trying to remember from Tristan's pig project. I went to a presentation about it. It was some years ago, and I didn't take notes, so don't quote me. But obviously, teaming up with animals and building ecosystems around food systems makes a lot of sense.
Now, one of the real issues with the food waste, dog food article is once you get into the meat and animal derivatives, they're not separating the different species out, it's all lumped together.
Yeah.
So, you know, if they are actually separated a bit more, you can make that waste stream more useful, because there's a danger of it having pig waste in it, so you can't feed it.
Yes.
So, you know, if they separate it, there's quite a lot, I'm realising there's quite a lot that could be done.
So again, is if you team up, so you can't feed mixed food residues to pigs or to other animals, you can't do it to anything. But if it's not mixed, if it's not all commingled, whether they have their legal terms, something, then you can. But then it's still got to be the right kind of food for the right kind of animal. So an example is here for Ian had a whole phase where he could access dates, and dates probably come from wherever they come from, Iraq or somewhere, Middle East or something, in huge containers, and then they're broken down and repackaged to go out to the whole food shops. So there's always a certain amount of residues and broken packets and spilled stuff and damaged goods, but it's all figs, and it's in a factory that only has figs. So you can be very confident that there isn't any, you know, bacon fat in there or something else. So Ian could access that. He's delivering his pies to London. He's always looking for ways to not come back empty in the delivery van. So he'll do a detour and pick up. So they do a lot of bread goes to the pigs here and other kinds of things. What I discovered with the dates, which they loved, was it just made them fat. It didn't really make them fill them up because they just got a lot of sugar in them. So it just made the meat very fatty, and that's not what the market wants. We don't want, although it's probably very nutritious food, it's not what the market wants. So there's a challenge there again about using waste in the right way. But so I think that if you, with smaller, more localized food systems, you can then build animal systems around them, then that would be able to intercept, reprocess, add value to, you know, to any food residues, leftovers, out of date stuff. And then at the same time is then you're in a way in which you can intercept the manure from those animals, and you can cycle that through community growing schemes. So again, we're moving to that, back to our systems thinking about trying to link things together and being strategic. Rather than wait for the waste to come to you, you go to the source and say, okay, let me work with you, let me take this, let me find a route to take whatever it is that you've got there. So and obviously we've coupled with pigs for millennia for that reason. And then also, of course, they do these other useful things, if you can manage them, to turn the soil and break ground for cultivation.
It would be yields from inedible forest floor as well. Like in medieval times, forest is a managed system, and you'd let the pigs every autumn go through and pick up all the acorns and things that you get, and mushrooms and whatever, things that you probably wouldn't want to eat. They just rummage around for a while, and that would ecologically mimic the disturbance that a wild boar would do anyway. And then you fatten up the pigs in that, take them back and slaughter them. So you turn land that you haven't got any inputs into calorie-rich food, which is really scary.
Yeah, I mean, pigs are forest animals, basically, as are chickens. So here's a very simple, I've got a picture up now of a very simple chicken tractor, mobile chicken ark. There's 1,000 variants of this idea. The principle is you're trying to meet the core needs of the chicken, very simply. This one looks like it might just be a day one. It hasn't looked like it's got a nesting box or whatever in it. But a bit of shade, a drinker, can move around, the chicken can access and turn, you can start to harvest the work of the chicken and channel energy into a place where it's useful and not destructive. Let's do that for a bit. Okay, so I like that one. Let's just spend a moment or two thinking about what happens when waste enters water. Let's have a little bit, think about water treatment with natural methods. What's that other than quite cruel to the child? Hey kid, just go swim in there. What's going on? Sorry? It's algae or pondweed or something, yeah. So that's what we call, that is an algal bloom, or it's eutrophication is a great word. So,
Shouldn't be in there, shouldn't it?
yeah, no, absolutely. I like they put the little flotation thing on the kid though. So,
Can you sell a swim in there to tourists?
yeah, that's probably. Well, I mean, that's just shocking, right? So, what's happening is farming. Wherever we humans are, what we tend to do is we tend to forage around the area and concentrate nutrients together into one place. And we do that through our refuse and feeding and animals in stables and all those kinds of things, farming practices. And that, so nature can't handle with lots of nutrients all in one place. They become dangerous, hazardous. And the danger, of course, what it is, it's going to rain, and rainwater goes downhill and it takes with it nutrients, either in particulate form or dissolved, and then it arrives in a watercourse. So we have lots of nutrients, lots of nitrogen in a watercourse that's going to stimulate plant growth. It's going to make plants grow very, very rapidly, cover the surface of the pond, make it dark underneath. And also, as those plants are growing, they're also dying and biodegrading. So there's bacteria there feasting away, and they're pulling the oxygen out of the water. So what happens when you put nutrients into water is you set in motion a chain reaction, which we call eutrophication, overstimulate plant growth, and the result of that is it robs the oxygen from the water and kills the fish. And then we move into a stagnant, sterile, stagnant, dead water course. Water without oxygen in it, of course, is no good for anything. So then that will start to pickle and it will start to bubble methane out, which is a climate change gas. So we've got a whole bunch of problems going on there. To remediate that, to solve that problem, what we could do is bubble oxygen in there. And we'd have to bubble enough oxygen in there to feed the bacteria so that they can digest all of that yellow goo. And we could even measure how much oxygen it would take to remediate that water, and we could give it a value. And we would call that its biological oxygen demand, BOD. That is the tool, that's the measurement that we use to work out how polluting various things are. So as the BOD goes down, the biological oxygen demand is reduced. We can see that we're improving the quality of the water. So that's how people look at it. So this is eutrophication, and we're doing this on multiple scales everywhere. It's happening everywhere. We're doing it in the soils, EUTRO, eutrophic. Good word. No, it's not a happy thing though, but anyway, we're doing it to the soils. It's leaching into the rivers, into watercourses. And so too much nitrogen in soils means that the indigenous native plants, wild plants get outcompeted by the really vigorous things like nettles and brambles and things that really like loads of nitrogen. And so we lose the diversity of all those little specialist plants evolved into those little tough little niches, just get wiped out by a carpet of, the things that like richer ground. In Paris, we supposedly climate emergency, we're very aware of our emissions, we've got all of these different strategies in place, but they're still allowing chicken sheds to go up everywhere. The chicken sheds pump tons of ammonia into the atmosphere. Ammonia is nitrogen in a gaseous form, just completely incompatible with what we're doing. And again, so anyway, we've just had a water quality survey done on the rivers in Britain. Every single river in this country is polluted. There isn't any one that isn't. And there's some ways we've removed some bad things that were circulating in terms of pollution, but the overall impact of leachates from farms, leachates from cattle barns, leachates from chicken sheds, it's not good. It's not good. So again, big scale sort of problem, but many sources, but a lot to do with the fact that, again, we're sort of out of balance. We're not contextualizing what we're doing. If you're going to build a big chicken shed, you should be constructing an ecosystem around it that is designed to absorbing and reprocessing the outputs of that chicken shed, not just seeing it as an industrial unit and that what comes out of that is something that can either be burnt or reprocessed into kind of a fertilizer, which again ends up leaching off the ground. Another change that we've seen in recent years is we used to stand cattle in deep litter in the winter. It's what you saw at Ford Hall Farm yesterday was very unusual. Their foggage system means that they don't need to bring their animals in winter. I think the young calves they keep in their first year, but most of their cattle there means that it stays outside all year round. There's massive advantage to that. One is you don't have to make hay because you maybe have a little bit as a reserve, but essentially they don't have to make hay, which means you don't have to have combine harvesters, whatever the drying and storing and the machines that you have to do that. Another reason though that we bring animals in winter is because they poach the ground. Like you were talking about your friend's horse. The cloven hooves, wet soil, really make a mess. Well, that rarely happens at Ford Hall Farm because they have so many different species of grasses in their pasture. And Charlotte didn't enlarge on that to the degree of the story that I remember, which is that it was ongoing, lifelong quest for Arthur Hollins was to get as many different species of grass into the sward as he could, and to allow them just to predominate on their own, trial and error sort of, on their own merits. And he was a great observer. Wherever he went, whenever he was off farm, he was looking to see the grasses. And if he saw one that he didn't recognize, he didn't feel he'd seen it before, he would grab handfuls of the seeds and put it in his pockets. And the next time he was walking around the farm, he would kick over molehills and seed the molehills. He never would have dug the ground. He would have been completely against that. So consequently, you can't even open the grass, the turf there, because it's such a dense mat of roots. So, yeah, an appreciation of what we were looking at yesterday. But for most people, they're nowhere near that, and also the stocking levels are often too high as well. So we tend to put cattle in barns in the winter, keep them warm, get them out of the cold, and stand them in deep litter. That's straw usually, and straw is high in carbon, and that carbon will combine chemically with the nitrogen in the manure and the urine of the animals, and you've got then something which you can compost and add onto the fields in the spring. That's a very tried and tested system. Straw, though, is a byproduct of industrial agriculture, and so one of those things that we see as being ubiquitous, but actually it's not necessarily. Lots of people are enthusiastic about straw bale houses and stuff like that, but isn't necessarily quite the panacea that we think it is, because it's still a product of, monoculture. However, traditionally in Wales, they would have valued bracken, and dry bracken can be cut and rolled, and there was a whole thing, a whole drama around cutting bracken. And what you'd imagine going to the top of a hill and going along with a scythe and cutting underneath the bracken and then rolling it, and then cutting underneath it again and rolling it. So you end up with a big, huge, like snowball of bracken, and you slowly roll it down the hill into the barn, stand the cows on it all winter. The action of the hooves breaks down the bracken, the stalks, creates more surface area. Obviously, the manure from the animals, carbon and nitrogen combination, bring it out in the spring, compost it, and now you're ready to go with your vegetables.
But presumably, in times gone by, before that, there would have been to do that.
I don't know. I mean, I just know that story, and I've heard it told many times. Well, it's true, but also to the pasture, as they had more animals, they would have cleared more woodland, and then the bracken sort of escapee. Bracken hyperaccumulates potash. So if you break down bracken with manure, you've got a really good, rich compost. So very, very valuable.
1/3 of Wales is covered in bracken.
Right, wow.
Apparently, according to somebody who was doing biomass studies on that back when I was at CAT.
Okay.
And it was increasing by 1.5% each year.
Wow. That's interesting.
Yeah.
I mean, bracken's an escapee from woodland systems, and I think the bracken's reoccurring is reminding us that all of that used to be forest as well. So interesting. Yeah, sorry. So we left that poor kid in the pond for a long time. Let's just think a little bit about water treatment and how we might be able to sort of offset some of these things. And just I'm going to bring you into a septic tank. Just worth knowing these things are around. I mean, especially here in Wales, in rural areas, many of our houses are not connected to main sewage, and yet we still have these flushing systems. Here's a question. Why do we put water in toilets? What function does that do? Transport, that's it. Away, yes.
It's quite fascinating. The language sets us up to fail. Throw away. That doesn't mean it's not really what we mean, generally.
No.
Dispose of thoughtfully.
Yes.
Or not even that, or try not to.
Yes. Yes, strategically, yeah.
It implies there is some way.
Yes, exactly, it does, doesn't
It
it?
sounds to change the language is changing, so resource ago never knew what recycling
Mm.
was, did they? Whereas now everybody knows what recycling is. So maybe the change in language might presage a change in behaviour.
Yeah. We don't call them rubbish dumps anymore. We call them household recycling centres. As to how much of that stuff does get recycled is another question, but sorry, I apologise to this child. Whoops. But we've got to go back into the pond, I'm afraid. So here's the thing. Yes, get me out of here. So when you put nutrients into water, you've caused yourself a massive challenge. And because now your nutrients are highly mobile and subject to gravity, whereas before they're not so much, you know. So we've amplified the problem. So we've normalized to the flushing water closet type system. I mean, that now almost pretty much appalled by anything else. What happens when you flush that toilet is sluice of water happens, maybe a pine scented fragrance enters the air, your vitreous white china, and it's just like it never happened, and we can all pretend that it was not a thing. But of course, what happens is it goes down a pipe, and more often than not, either ends up at a big sewage farm, but basically the same thing happens in your septic tank. It's the same biology. So the first thing is that water is going to hit this baffle here. It's going to hit a little plate or wall or something, so it can't just go straight through the system. So we're going to try and make it do the longest journey that it can as it goes around within the septic tank, so that it can experience all of the biology that's in there. So on the top, you're going to have a sort of a foamy scum layer. It's a good word, that, isn't it? We've got sludge and scum to look forward to. Quite good adjectives, quite good descriptive words. But actually, what's happening in there is it's fermenting. And the very same yeast and bacteria that in your food, yeast and bacteria that in your gut, guess what? They're here too. And what they're doing is that they are fermenting and breaking down that into its sort of composite parts. And a lot of that, what goes on is still aerobic. There's dissolved oxygen in there, and we have a nice foamy scum layer on the surface. And then also there will be sediment. As things are being digested, there's also going to be particulates that sediment out. So the biological oxygen demand in here is pretty high, but it's being worked on, and by a whole set of sort of yeast and bacteria breaking things down a bit. And it's going to carry on circling through the tank and sort of doing a sort of circuitous journey. So it's experiencing different bacterial populations, slightly different conditions, different depths of the tank. And then out comes, here's another lovely word, effluent. And we've still got water, but with dissolved nutrients in it, and it's still problematic. And what is happening, one of the reasons why our river qualities are poor, is because when it rains, these systems then are accelerated, and water passes through them it hasn't had a chance to digest as much as it should have. Another thing that happens is that people are extending their houses, they're putting more and more tarmac down, and garages and parking and things. And often they hook things, the drains go into sewers. What you don't want is rainwater going into a sewer. It's another mistake, because then it's not designed to take that volume of water. If you're overusing a system, putting too much of a load on it, then again, it's not going to actually process those nutrients efficiently. So there's a consideration. And then what we want to do with that effluent is get rid of it, chuck it away. And the best way to do that would be to spread it out over a big area. So we might have a big leachate field with little pipes that dribble and spread that water over a long area, surface area. So hopefully the landscape can cope with it. And it's allowed to percolate down through the soil. And then, and again, it's covering a vast surface area as it trickles down through that soil, covers all those little particulate, little soil particles, interacts with all the bacteria and plant roots and things. Some of those nutrients get taken up again. And hey, that's more or less good enough. That's what we do. That's our system. And it's having, we're saying we are, and as we increase the density of housing and as we cover more surfaces in impermeable things, the system starts to lose some of its efficiency. But that's basically what we do.
I've got a comment from Clovis.
Yeah.
He's saying we have used algae to feed fish. Sometimes when we use sort of feed fish, that reduces nutrification.
Yep. Very good point. Clovis is studying sort of fish farming, and there's a lot of fish in tanks. They eat a lot of tilapia and Nile perch in Uganda, and tilapia are vegetarians. And I think there's a lot of different fish that come under that heading, actually. I think it's quite a big thing, but they're generally vegetarian fish and they can live in quite high density as well. So they're very good for fish farming. But even then, fish farms eutrophy. So you still need something like a reed bed system to resolve that. And here's a very simple schematic of a reed bed. I'm going to just jump in and look. Let's just think about these wetland plants and how they might function. And on Monday, when we go to Llanfochlin, I will show you a reed bed system that cleans the surface runoff from Llanfochlin town before that returns into the Kyne River, where it's a very environmentally sensitive area, because trout lay their eggs there and they're very sensitive to particulates. Yeah.
I once went to an earthship eco-friendly house, and the water use, your wee basically. The water goes around the whole house, collected from the roof. It's drinking water, then shower water and toilet flush water. Then after that, it goes around hydroponic system and feeds plants in the greenhouse, something like that. And then after that, the last of it, which is classed as like grey water, it's dirty. It goes into a reed bed, which they had at the downhill from the house, and they grew willow in it, which was a year.
Okay. Yeah. So we've called grey water is water that we've used for washing. So that's your washing machine, your bath.
I can't remember what.
Maybe your food washing.
Grey water was used in the toilet. Which,
and then we would call that black water that comes up, or sewage water basically.
Plants, which then went to the toilet, which then went to the reed bed.
And the word sewage means toilet waste and water mixed together. Again, so let's go back to this. So whatever's coming out of the end of our septic tank is still full of dissolved nutrients. And one strategy is to try and hide that by allowing it to trickle into nature. A better thing to do with it would be to trickle it over a reed bed system and give it a chance to be re-oxygenated, to resolve the BOD, and also then to harvest those nutrients into a form in which we can actually use them, and a way in which they're now no longer dissolved in water. And the way to do that is, notice here we've got an enclosed lagoon. We've got a pond, basically, the constructed pond, and this one is water. These two here have got a sort of gravel, or sort of a mixture of, gravelly particulate substrate. Let's just look at the first one. So in comes our nutrient-laden water, and it crosses the pond, interacts with the reeds, and leaves at the surface level. Second one, the nutrient-laden water is now leaving the first lagoon and entering the second lagoon. In the second lagoon, you notice it's full of sand and gravel, and it's going to also flow past the reeds, where it's going to interact with those reeds. And here it leaves from the middle of the system, from lower down, from a different part. And that means that each time we're creating slightly different conditions and favoring slightly different interactions. This is what we call a horizontal flow reed bed. And this next one is a vertical flow reed bed. So here you can see the nutrient-laden water that's come out of the second lagoon is now flowed onto the surface evenly and allowed to flow downwards. So again, it's going to interact with the plants in a different way. Those conditions are going to favor slightly different microbial conditions. So we'll get an uptake of a different part of the nutrient profile. We can measure relatively easily, if you're a scientist and have a test tube, you can relatively easily measure the biological oxygen demand of your effluent as it enters and leaves each one of those lagoons. Yes?
What do you need a bottom, on the bottom one? Could you just have on swale?
This is a contained system, so we're not interacting with the outside soils. This is in a contained system in a lagoon. So and you're seeing it in cross section. So and I guess the first point is that they're trying to create a different set of conditions slightly in each reed bed. Favors different microbes, which then gives you a different uptake of nutrients. Let's come back to here's another system, similar, based on the same idea. So some kind of settling tank. That's your septic tank. That's where that's going to go on. And again, allowing the water then to interact with different kinds of plants. So the degree of complexity we would bring to the system would depend on whether we're treating grey water or black water. And obviously we need to think about the volume of material that's going through that. So it has to work in proportion. And these systems work all year round, but they slow down in the winter. So you've got to also design for the minimum, not for the maximum of the biological activity. But the thing I wanted to get to here was, if we just imagine how, so one of the plants most successfully used in reed bed systems is Phragmites reed, Phragmites, Phragmites, and you'll see that in Llanfochlin when we go there on Monday. And the way that these marsh plants work is very few plants can survive having their roots wet all the time. And one of the reasons is because that becomes an anaerobic environment, and then the plant can't trade nutrients with the microbes. What marsh plants can do in wet or waterlogged soil is oxygen enters through their leaves and they pump it right down into the roots and diffuse it off the root hairs, creating a little aerated zone around the tips of the roots. So then they can nurture a population of bacteria that will live there and exchange nutrients from the water back to the plant. That's how they do it. So it's reducing the BOD because the plant itself is adding oxygen into the water. And it's also reducing the BOD because it's taking up the nutrients. So what we're doing now is we're removing the nutrients from the water and turning it into reeds. Reeds, non-water soluble. We've now solved the problem of having nutrients in water. We've turned it back into a plant. We can harvest those plants, we can compost them, and now our nutrients are non-mobile and they're going to stay around in the soil. So we've resolved the problem of having water in the toilet.
Got some interactions going on
Yep.
here. So COVID seems to give some interesting statistics. This is eutrophication affects 54% of Asian lakes, 53% of those in Europe.
Mm-hmm.
Sorry, 58% of lakes in Europe, 48% of those in North America, 41% in South America, 28% in Africa. So it's clearly a massive problem.
It's a massive problem. What's happening to the Great Lakes is utterly horrendous. It's not just eutrophication, it's toxins.
And the question is asking, how can you solve the problem of eutrophication in a permaculture field?
Yep.
Ali also had his hand up as well, so he wants to make a point.
Okay, we'll look forward to that. This is a massive problem, and in some ways, a massive opportunity. Sorry, the time's gone out the window a bit today, hasn't it? Sorry, but 10:20. We'll just have I'll make a couple of points, and we'll have a break at 10:30. Sorry about messing the time up. I wanted to share this picture, and especially with everybody. I think we all are familiar with this amazing body of water, absolutely phenomenal. I think it's the most beautiful place I've ever been. I just love it. There's these amazing little islands in Lake Victoria, Sesse Islands and other places, and there's one here called, amazing island here called Mfangano as well, which I'm very, very interested in. I want to do a big permaculture project there, actually. That's one of my ambitions. We get the chance. Lake Victoria is the size of Ireland, the Republic and Northern Ireland together. It's huge. It's a volcanic caldera as well, so it's a product of enormous plate tectonic movements from previously, and it's surrounded by we've got Mwanza there, we have Kisumu there, we have Kampala there, Entebbe, Jinja, Masaka. We got some big, and also it's a part of the world where population, Musoma. We've got some big settlements there. Guess what's happening to Lake Victoria?
It's full of that, it's not been to Ginger, it's full of that.
With water hyacinth.
Yeah, but also there's something in that you're not allowed to sit on the grass, are you? Because the things that go up through you.
They have, is it schistosomiasis? Is it the thing that called,
Yeah, it's when you're in the mud.
It's only, the goes, Bill Hartzier. Bill Hartzier is there, but only really where there's human settlement. So if you're away on more remote places, it's not. It's only very local things, so you have to be careful. No, it's really beautiful, but it's eutrophying. And you go down to a certain depth and it becomes a dead zone. And that's because especially some of the Tanzanian cities are just pumping raw sewage into there. And to a certain extent, the biology of the lake can deal with it. It's a very, very big ecosystem, but only to a certain extent. So I spend time thinking about how to resolve that. Obviously, part of the answer is don't put it in there in the first place. But there's also, like, would have to be layers of strategy. So I'm thinking about that fairly seriously. And I would love to collaborate with people who would like to work with me on that, because I have ideas about how we might be able to do that. Anyway, it's a slight.
I've got another comment from Fergus.
Yeah.
Said, to compliment on to what Steve just said about nutrients and water to the roots. Bulrush plant and papyrus is only used in wetland areas of Uganda. That's a suggestion from Alan.
Very good. Yes. So it was remembering my Bible studies from primary school, but Moses in the bulrushes and the papyrus parchments that the Egyptians did. And then there we are in Uganda on the Nile, and there is papyrus everywhere. And you go, I think I've heard of that. Yeah, anyway, interesting. So, sorry.
Does it drain out to ocean, or is it?
Yes. It's the source of the Nile. So 2,000 miles journey that water is going. It's, yeah. There's a place in Rwanda somewhere where you can walk up a ridge, and on one side there's a little trickling streams that are the headwaters of the Nile, and just on the other side of the ridge there's little trickling streams at the headwaters of the Congo. So go all the way out, and it's just, scale is awesome. So you could just imagine all bodies of water are now being stressed by human activities. Too many animals, too much waste, bad sewage management, all of that is contributing to eutrophication. And as the oxygen is depleted in the water, the opportunities for life are also greatly reduced. So there's something which we need to think about a lot. Okay, so, okay, yes, 4 minutes, we'll have a thing. So here's another reed bed system. You can imagine, you could, if you're creative, you could come up with many different ways to have reed beds. And there's a nice schematic of one on farm. You can see this is a system going in to treat leachate from a barn. You know, it's a lagoon, it's a contained space, it's lots of surface area with gravel, and we've got limestone chips and stuff there, more gravel, reeds planted, vegetation. So we're swapping, and that's literally just using, it's a passive process, you're just allowing water to drain downhill, using the slope of the land and treating and cleaning it. You could possibly integrate these things into buildings, you could put them onto roofs, you could start to get really adventurous about how you could approach this. Yeah. Sorry?
This is just the watery waste.
Yeah, so you've still got a septic tank.
So I mean, this is to deal with the systems that we've got, rather than necessarily being the ideal system that we would have in an ideal.
Yeah, well, so we're always going to have problems with eutrophication. That's always going to be a thing. The fact that we use water closets, toilets, amplifies that a lot, because there's a lot of available nutrient that's very, very mobile. And so I started to tell the story about deep litter in barns for cows as well, well, when you do all that deep litter in barns for cows, you then got to go and dig it all out, and that's work. So what you could do is you could make the cows stand on concrete and let the manure just be on the ground, and then you hose it out with water and put it into a big tank, so no one's got to do the straw thing. And then with that tank, you can take that out on a tractor and inject that manure into the ground in a way in which you've amplified the problem again, because you put it into water. And that's again what's happening in Wales. That's the modern system. Yeah, no. And it smells now because we've got all of this liquid manure, you know, rather than, it's not adsorbed into the bedding. So convenience all the time means that we are freeing up and accelerating these nutrient cycles without thinking about the downstream effects that they're having. And we can remediate these things really easily with biological systems. CAT has basically run on a rebed system since it started, and that's 70,000 visitors a year at its peak. And it's not it's a reasonable size, but it's not massive, and it's only it's a septic tank and 3 lagoons. And the BOD of the water that's leaving the bottom of that system is lower than the river it's going into. So it's actually improving the water quality of the Dilys River at the bottom. And if it wasn't, you'd be doing it wrong. But there's a good environmental measurement, is you can take a resource, use it, get as many uses out of it as you can, and then return it to the environment in a better condition than you took it. That's what we should be aiming for, not doing the minimum compliance so that you don't get fined by the Waterways Authority or the Environment Agency, which is what industry would do. Is if you're allowed to pollute to 0.8, they'll pollute to 0.8 or whatever the metric might be. Whereas in permaculture, we can always do better, and we're always trying to do better, and we want to get as many uses of a resource as we can. And when we return it to the nature, we want it to be in a better condition than we started. Paul Stamets has had a lot of thinking about this, and he came up with mycorrhizal remediation. If you look at mycelium under a microscope, it's a net, it's a web, it's a vast amount of surface area, a little bit like our reed bed, gravels and sands might be, but even more so, this is with a scanning electron microscope. So imagine you take a substrate, here we have straw, you myceliate it, you introduce your mycelium, and now it can act as some kind of a filter. You could put it in a burlap sack full of wood chip, and you can then impregnate that with the right kind of mycelium, and then you allow your nutrient contaminant, heavily laden water to come into contact with that mycelium, which will then take up those nutrients. Here we are seeing mycoremediation, and Stamets also claims you can train fungi to digest particular things. You can grow a broad spectrum fungi in an environment with a bunch of different nutrients in it, and then withdraw those nutrients one by one by one, till the only thing it's got is the thing that you want it to target. So you can break down, well, they're working on that. They found ones that will break down oil. He actually did one that could break down soiled gearbox oil, and the mushrooms that they grew on it had no hydrocarbons in them. You could have technically eaten them. And that was just with an oyster mushroom. So there's many sort of biological approaches that we can do that support the microbial and fungal universe, and and give the possibility then also for other yields. Yeah.
It's almost as if governments and things like that don't actually want biological solutions to things because there isn't enough work involved in them. It doesn't provide, even though it does the same service for us for free, and better than some industry that employs lots of people.
It's almost like you're criticising our market-based capitalist model again.
I was going to go for, you can blame money and things like that, but actually, I think it's our obsession with busyness. As if you can't be happy unless you are busy. And I heard this on a mindfulness thing. I think it's more than money, it's obsession with constantly occupying ourselves and distracting ourselves from our minds.
I'm going to pause the recording. We're going to have a quick shuffle around a tea break just for a few minutes. And,
I've had a few further ideas that I would like to go. One was to ride the Grand National when she's on the 90th birthday.
Sorry? I don't know. I mean, I could bring another one from home. I mean, I did bring the barbecue today, though, so we might like that next. I've just put on the up on the board on the screen is I want to get out of this now. Oh, here we go. It's a blog post that I wrote a little while ago on the subject of this guy Joseph, who has a little fish farm in Homa Bay in Kenya, and this was happening. I can only assume that was not the intention. His fish were dying, and really the problem was too high a BOD. Too much nutrient in his water, and he's not dealing with that. He's not remediating that, and so we got into a conversation about how we might reduce it, and I found this little measurement. So that biological oxygen BOD level in a milligram is milligrams per liter. And we need it obviously to be very low, 1 or 2. 3 to 5 is moderate. Anything above that starts becoming somewhat polluted. And you notice that 6 to 9 is somewhat polluted, and then it goes 100 or more very polluted. So it can go very high, and I suspect that poor Chinese boy was swimming in something that was very high.
So it's a measure of how much oxygen, whatever's in there,
yes.
take to complete oxygen.
Yes, yes, exactly.
It's like stoichiometric.
Yeah. It's quite a handy measurement. It's a good way of visualizing what's happening.
Is there something you can measure it with? Or...
Well, I'm trying to remember. I mean, because certainly I remember having that conversation with Louise Halestrap and Peter Harper at CAT, wandering around the things, and they talking about that, testing it at each part of the reed bed and what its value might be. Whether they were doing that in their own little lab or sending it off, I actually don't know. But I would imagine it can't be that hard, but you need the right litmus or something. I don't know.
It's a complicated thing, doesn't it? It's not actually measuring a deficiency of something.
Yeah.
The thing isn't there. You can't measure how much oxygen isn't in there. You've actually got to assess the reactivity
of the nutrient load that's in the water.
So I imagine it is a bit of a laboratory.
Little bit, probably, yeah.
But I might only put a test tube on it, so much for that.
One way that they illustrated that was in that, because they had that other mini reed bed system that was in that polytunnel that was for kind of, it was actually for the eco cabins, but it was also a study thing. And they had like goldfish in the final pond. That was another way of indicating.
Yeah, and you can do one of various things dark.
Yeah, canary in a coal mine kind of thing. There's an element of animal cruelty in that. You could have a small Chinese boy and you could float him in it. No, sorry, that sounded appalling, but that was only because we were referring to the picture we saw before. So, reed bed system. So you can imagine a reed bed system that might deal with effluent outflow from the fish tank. Sources of dissolved oxygen in water. It's worth just noting that photosynthesis, plants in water are doing that. So there's our reed bed idea. The oxygen will diffuse into the water just because of because that's what happens. And also here we've got a sort of illustration of water's aerated as it tumbles and folds over rocks and interacts with, imagine air bubbles being trapped within it. So those might be all strategies that we might want to include into our water remediation things. We want it to trickle over things, bump and bang into things so it folds in air, allow oxygen to diffuse into it and bring it into contact with as many different plants as you can. Here's a very, very simple system. This is on Mfangano Island, actually, in the middle of Lake Victoria. And this guy is growing fish in whatever it is. It's a excavated hole in the ground, is lined. And his way of re-oxygenating the water was to take a bucket of water and pour it into this canister here, which is filled with gravel, and then it trickles out and flows along this pipe where there's plants growing in gravel, and then returns back to the tank again. So very low tech, involving bloke with a bucket, but something there's not much to break, not much investment required. And there's another similar type system, plants growing in a guttering. Allowing the water to flow through as much surface area, much contact with different things as possible, and improves it. So this is the thing that I'm fascinated with. I'm thinking about the Lake Victoria problem. And obviously, this is any body of water. It does not have to be that one. Other brands are available. No, but seriously, this is vetiver. Vetiver is a marsh plant. For all of the amazing things that it can do, land remediation, what we saw in Chimanimani in Chukukwa, but vetiver has an absolutely vast root system. There are different varieties of it, and you can grow it on a pontoon. You can float it on a thing, and if you look underneath it, lots of roots. Now, can you imagine what the actions that are going on around that is that plant is photosynthesizing. It's adding oxygen to the water. That plant is also pumping oxygen down into its roots because it's a marsh plant, and that's what marsh plants do. Let's take a guess, take a wild guess. Around the edges of Lake Victoria, what do you think is one of the primary food sources for people? Fish. Fish and water, very, good relationship there. So problem is that if you have a lot of population pressure and a lot of people fishing every day, the fish populations get a little bit compromised. So the lake's really big, and people have only got little sort of pirogue type, little canoe things. So even on Mfangano Island, you see at night time there's just loads and loads and loads of little boats all around. They only go a few miles because that's their range really. and they've pretty much fished out a lot of the big fish around where the settlements are. And what I would imagine is, without knowing, but I can take a really good guess, is if you've got loads of pontoons of vetiver floating with big, massive root systems going down into the lake, and also aerating the lake and actually starting to energize that ecosystem, is you'd have loads of plankton and things like that start to occur. And also is you'd create a lovely habitat for fish fry and little baby, waterborne things to live in a, protected environment. So I think that you could be starting to address some of the issues around that in strategic ways. Obviously, I don't know how to scale this up. I mean, we're talking about very, very big body of water. So to scale this up would be challenging.
Can I just
Yeah.
comment on that? Because I did my PhD fieldwork in a fishing village on the southern shore of Lake Choga. So on that map that Steve showed us, the Nile comes up, and then there's a small transverse, like horizontal lake.
This one here.
This one up. Yeah, that's Lake Choga. And then the Nile continues on upwards. So, so I was there and observing a lot of activity. I was actually researching the lives of children growing up in that community. But obviously, like fishing is the main livelihood. And the stories that they were telling, because they used to, in years gone by, they used to regularly catch these big Nile perch that were 100 kilograms in weight. Now it's like 5 foot long. And that has been diminishing because of it being a very easy, fishing was an easy livelihood for people to get into. And it was actually encouraging a lot of school dropouts, particularly amongst the boys, because the quality of the education wasn't very good. So it was like a toss up between sitting there not really getting a very good education versus getting out and earning a bit of cash and then being able to drink and gamble, what they were all sort of doing. So when I was there, I got sort of summoned. Somebody had actually caught 70 kilo Nile perch, and that was a rarity. But so there are all different types of fishing that's going on, and like the activities around fishing is very gendered as well. So in that community, the women didn't go out on canoes, whereas maybe it's another fishing village they did. So the women were, so the men, another type of fishing was around penning, which are like tiny little fish, like sardine size, and they would catch them at night. So this would be sort of, they'd go out in the canoes, and they weren't supposed to use a mosquito net to try and stop overfishing with some regulations, like the size of the seine of the net you're supposed to use for different types of fishing you do. So using the cave fishermen, you had to they were floating lanterns on water to simulate the moon, and the fish come up in the night thinking that they're looking at the moon, and they set up the fishing net underneath those floating lanterns, and the fishing net is actually a mosquito net. So literally, so it literally just when they put it in, they catch everything. So they're catching all these smaller fry, say the Nile perch, that should have been, consumed food, smaller net, and then grow bigger. So then they come back to shore, and meanwhile you've got all the women coming down, and jostling to receive, the fish, because then they take it in sacks and dry it on the rocks and sell it on. So because there's again competition, so if your husband is into fishing, you then need to get the fish and earn your livelihood as a woman. So there's this terrible sort of one activity that's well known is sex with fish, and in particular in these lakes, the HIV prevalence is well above average because of
these island communities are devastated by HIV, and this western part of Uganda was HIV ground zero. They lost a whole generation of people there. But sorry, was it?
Yeah, so it was very interesting. And a lot of the children also are involved in like this fish drying activity as well.
It's a very, very big deal. The little carpenta, those little fish, is a big part of the world economy, of the food economy there. And they're almost like the insect version, you know, like the fish, and tiny little things that breathe very quickly. So this kind of thing would be very, very useful. You could almost create no-go zones where fishing would be very difficult, where stocks could regenerate, and you could. So then to go back to the multifunctionality of the vetiver, if you've got it growing on rafts, if you've then got something that's growing continuously, you're on the equator here, 12 hours of sun every day, unlimited supply of water. That plant's going to grow like a very fast-growing thing. And so you can continually crop it, you can feed it to goats, and then also you've done exactly the same as the rebed, you've turned your soluble dissolved nutrients into a stable form in terms of the plant, and now then you can put that through animals and build compost systems, which are then going to feed your land-based systems.
You're not so reliant on fish.
Yeah.
You can feed a lot more goats. You don't have to fish as much.
Yeah, exactly. Schematic of ponds, just exploring different. These are some pictures out of the at the designer's manual, thinking about aquatic systems, and I think we can have things that look semi-wild and semi-natural. Yeah, anyway, okay.
There is, I saw on Twitter actually, there's a lady in Uganda who's mentioned like the it's like working out what it takes, and she's using that for compost. So she's set up a little industry, taking away the water hyacinth that's holding up harbours and ports or landing sites for fishing, and they're selling compost.
It's all resource, and in the process of resolving these pollution things, you're getting yields because it's not waste.
And the more and more local that becomes, the more places to turn.
That's vetiver root system. That is just literally awesome. So think about surface area, think about how the nutrient exchange is happening around that. Think about how much habitat that could create.
Can that be like chopped or grazed and then it grows back from?
Yeah, yeah.
So you don't have to put roots.
No, never. So you literally, you've got a permanent root mass there, and you completely, you could harvest it almost. Well, yeah. I mean, I've seen sort of pontoon systems where they've done it, but and I was also trying to think about how another thing that you could do is, you could have like a biochar island and a solar pump that just brings lake water onto the island and trickles it down through the biochar and back into the lake again. That in itself would aerate it significantly.
Just like having a biochar floaty matrix in the facility. You can remove growth down the surface.
Yeah, it's a really, really interesting idea, and I do think that I'd like collaboration. I would like to. One of the things I'd like to do at Mfangano, if I did get, I want to do a PDC at Mfangano on this island. I've been there. I've met some very interesting people there. They have enormous problems. Because the two main ways of making a living on this little island are fishing and making charcoal. So guess what's happened over time? Forests have disappeared and the fish are disappearing. So, but I also think that just by a slightly different approach, they could have a farm system that would be, really, really successful. Yeah.
Yeah, that's that's native to the UK.
No, it comes from the Himalayas, but it's very hardy. I don't know how frost hardy it is. Obviously, it could deal with an air frost. I don't know if it could deal with a hard, good, strong ground frost, but we probably wouldn't quite have anything quite as magnificent as that, but we must have equivalent species.
Something that yields a lot.
Yeah.
What was happening if the roots grow down to the bed? Would you not congest? So I'm just thinking about, I live on the river.
Yeah.
And when willow falls in, so we have bits of willow going, and it roots, and then actually it becomes then an obstruction to the flow of the river.
Well, yeah, that's kind of the river doing its thing. That is what happens in rivers. and I've got another presentation that I haven't managed to fit in yet, but rivers and streams can be self-damming. And actually they almost mimic the action of beavers and stuff, because when you get a big flood, trees fall down and then rocks lodge in it and then sediments build up behind and it builds its own wetland. And that's actually a dynamic that happens in watercourses, and then ultimately the river might find a different channel. So a huge oxbow, yeah.
It went to different, used to go a different way about 60,000 years ago. Probably still the tree going.
I'm going to take you through a chain of thinking here on this little slideshow about, imagine that we didn't put water in toilets. We then wouldn't have to do the whole reed bed thing, because we haven't got the challenge of having put nutrients in water. Is there a way in which we could not do that? This is, you can. I mean, you might just want to have a little check to think about what might be in that grey water, you know, like whether that might be damaging to plants in any way. An easier thing to do perhaps would be just to run it through a very simple filter, like a basket with straw in it, removing particulates and oily, you know, things that might come out of your wet sink that might make the garden smell a little bit. And then that's something that obviously can go into your compost heap. So very, very simple sort of filter. And then you're really in territory there, in good territory there. Again, on one of my slideshows, which I haven't fitted in, but Peter Harper, who's the research biologist at CAT and the guy who coined the term alternative technology, in fact, a really beautifully creative man, slightly naughty in the sense of it's creativity, you know, there's no boundaries to the way he thinks. He looked at his house as a system, and he thought, what are the two most useful effluents coming out of the house? One was rainwater, the most available, usable, easy to adapt. Rainwater, grey water, and urine. So he called it house juice. So these are effluents coming out of the house. So then could he collect those into a tank where they mix together, and then he can sort of build a soak away system in the garden that went down into his sort of zone for, shall we say, you know, soft fruit and canes and raspberries area, and covered that with something so it didn't get washed through by the rain too much. So there's lots of opportunities. And once you start thinking in those terms, it's, yeah, it's interesting. So another thing that Peter Harper measured was the nutrient flows through your body. So if you, what's the nutrient value of your hair, of your dead skin, belly button fluff, anything else you might want to think of? And the answer to that is, it's all pretty irrelevant. The easiest thing to control, about 70% of the nutrients flowing through your body leave in the form of urine. And urine's very easy to intercept and to deal with in a specific way. So, and also is, as it leaves your body, unless you have some horrendous infection, it's also antiseptic. So it's not necessarily a hazardous thing to work with. When it's fresh, it very quickly becomes so, because it's a great environment for microbes to multiply in. The best thing to do with urine is to get it into carbon as quickly as possible. Otherwise, you get that urea smell and you get the opportunity for bacterial and contamination. And so back to the biochar, straw, we had a PDC some years ago where somebody gave us one of those, not a super big hay bale, but you know, those hay bales of that kind of size. And they had a compost toilet, but there was sort of 50% women and men. The women were often queuing for the toilet. And so us guys put the bale in a modest place, and we weed on it. And I can't remember how many of us there were, but let's say there was like 10 or something like that. And 2 weeks later, we're still weeing on this bale and not one whiff of ammonia, nothing. We went, nothing. Yeah. So you get that enough carbon. So the secret to compost making, the secret to understand that is getting your carbon and nitrogen balance right. And Charlotte said it exactly right yesterday when she showed you that compost turning thing. She said, if it's not working right, the answer is always more sawdust. It always is going to be malfunctioning because you haven't got enough carbon, and you can resolve it by adding carbon. Yeah.
I've used the compost toilet, the Earthship from Brighton, and it was an outdoor one, to be
Yeah.
It's much-
No, they smell ever so slightly of compost.
They smell like sawdust to me. It's more
Yeah.
than any toilet I've ever been in.
Yeah. No, once you got over the, so
We use chimneys to make the airflow.
absolutely you can.
Religious.
In The Unbearable Lightness of Being, Milan Kundera is a great book, isn't it? So in the first chapter, he gives you a definition of the word kitsch.
Yes, oh, that's what it is.
And he says kitsch is the philosophical denial of the existence of shit. So we put everything pink and fluffy and nice and, you know, whatever, like say the vitreous china and the pine scented fragrance. It's because we want to not embrace that side of reality, of the dark, decomposing, dank, you know, earthworms and what have you, rats and tails and puppy dogs' tail, whatever it is, whatever it is.
And only the dog was able to bear the lightness of being. In the book, that's what it was
Yeah,
saying,
right.
like, only the dog.
So as a dog lover, I can see now why you like that book. Okay, so let us, it is a wonderful book. Let's go back to our long drop toilet, as we were mentioning. And so you've got that lovely urea back smell, which isn't great. And wonderful picture. I like all the little individual turds there in the drawing. Someone's gone to a lot of trouble there to draw that. Well, that wouldn't look like that because it would break down very quickly. But there's a much more important point being made. There's 2 points being made there. One is that is still leachate, that's still nutrients in the wrong place. So either they're going to go deep down into the ground where they're now out of the nutrient cycle, or they're going to reoccur into a watercourse somewhere and cause problems downstream. Another issue is it doesn't matter how deep you make your hole, flies can still fly in and out and potentially move pathogens around. Some of the worst diseases are waterborne diseases through fecal oral transmission, which is typhoid and cholera. So you don't want to mess around with this stuff. You want to get it right, and all sorts of parasites. So I am not a fan of the long drop toilet. I think for very low use in a very remote place, national parks or something, that's probably okay, but not really for regular use, because you're back into the thing of throw it away. It's a resource. So here is our...
What happens long term where they're clean? Because I always thought things like Glasgow, where you had quite large buried pits, which were then pretty well filled in again straight after. Is that still there, or has that found its way?
But at Glastonbury, they have those, they kind of pump them out. They have a kind of a...
They used in the early days,
Yes.
it was just a big hole.
Yeah.
And they had these wooden arrangements that went over the big
Yeah.
holes, and they filled and they moved them. In fact, sometimes during the festival,
Yeah.
they'll dig a new hole,
Mm.
move the whole arrangement, and very quickly just put soil over the old.
So that's kind of okay up to a point, but the landscape can only absorb so much, and you've got to be aware of what the leachate fields and the geology underneath as to where that, you know, you might have mobility and it might come out somewhere else.
I just wonder if it did, so
But-
whether it was so low, so deep that it was whatever, anaerobic or not the right soil.
But again, the thing to do to reduce the effect of it being too mobile would be to throw in loads of carbon.
Yeah, which they didn't.
No.
Which was no thought.
Yeah, no thought about that. I had a friend, someone who was doing this PDC, and they were living in a van with their partner, and they were saying they've got a little chemical loo on there, which they don't like to use because of all the chemicals, and you've got to deal with what comes out of it. But instead, they just use it to pee in, and then whatever could deal with the urine separately. But it smelled because of the thing. And I said to what the answer would be: put sawdust in there, and then you won't get the smell.
It is a bit of a culture shock, but once you've done it once, it's okay.
Once you've broken the kitsch factor, that was my point, not so much to celebrate that wonderful book, but just that statement of that you've got to get over that. And once you've got over that, is you go, do you know what? This is just part of life. Everybody does, every other animal doing it. The cows are standing in the field. We're not grossed out by that. Let's just get over it, okay? And understand that. Just at a point. Yeah, no. You're turning a resource into a problem you've now got to deal with. I don't even know what those chemicals are, but you can't then just put that into a drain, can you? It's now got to go somewhere else. Let us talk about and celebrate the twin vault dry composting toilet. This is a tried and tested system. It's worked for a very, very long time, and you know, it has there's a little bit of management. You've got to work with it, but not a lot. These pictures are out of Joseph Jenkins' wonderful book, Hugh Manure. And previous versions of it you can download the PDF of, and there's loads of nice little YouTube things of people composting poo, which I'm sure you would like to see. Okay, so dry composting toilet. It's a twin vault system, and the idea is that you have a sense of the volume of use that this system is going to have. And your twin vaults are designed so that you'll use one side for a year, close it over, and then switch to the other side. Every time you use it, you add sawdust, small amount. Could be biochar, could be broken down leaves, leaf litter, pine needles, anything really. Do you know what the best thing is sawdust, not shavings, not wood chip. Sawdust, fine particles, high surface area, lots of adsorption, and you'll have no smell and no other problems. So if it's right, things to avoid is it must not get flooded. So you might want to reduce the amount of urine going into it. You might have a urine separator. You might just encourage maybe the male population to explore a straw bale kind of option. Or you just add more sawdust. But it mustn't be wet, it mustn't be flooded. There's a slight problem with the shape of this, as in it's very tall and thin, which means the bottom bit's going to get compacted and in danger of being aerobic. So one way you might remediate that is by starting off with a lot of sawdust in the bottom or some straw to make sure that doesn't happen. Owen? Or biochar, yeah, sure.
I've seen some design of the compost toilet also, and there was some design, like, it was just one toilet, but there was like some spiral that we went down, because there's a liquid that could flow down, and obviously number two just dropped straight down.
So there's
but it's separated that way.
So there's a thing, I don't know, it has like a brand name or something, but basically it's like a centrifuge. So you put your flushed water into the centrifuge, and the water clings to the surface, and then the solids drop straight through. So you can actually separate it out again.
And that goes into a centrifuge.
Yeah. Anyway, I'll just walk us through this. It's simple. So we're going to use. There's your commode, your seat. Obviously, it just goes straight down. It's a tube or a seat with a hole in it. It was originally here, so we use that. We're adding sawdust every time, and after about a year, we're going to close that hatch and move next door. So this material at the bottom is now a year old, and this at the top is fresh. We now use this side for a year. This little pipe here is not showing loads of effluent going out into the environment, but there might be, a tiny little bit, because obviously there's lots of bacteria in there respiring, which will create water. So that needs somewhere to go. But the idea is that all of the toilet waste is held in the sawdust. So now, by the time we filled the second chamber, the first chamber is now, this material is 2 years old and this material is 1 year old. It would have reduced in size to a third of what it was. And this is set up here with some slats and boards, so you can now dig it out. And so that's the only time you've actually got to sort of interact with it. But when you do dig it out, what you quickly realize is it's compost. It doesn't look in any way like the original material. It's really, and you could be very, very sure that it's pathogen free. At CAT, they have visitors from all over the world going there, and you maybe think, okay, you don't know what potential pathogens or parasites might be in there, so you might err on the side of caution. And when you dig it out, you might layer it in straw and compost it again, and not necessarily put it into your leafy green salad garden, but put it into your forest garden. Claire?
Yeah, because I think many of the pathogen cysts, they die up after a year.
Yeah.
So it's a time.
There's a time factor too.
But what about, contraceptive chemotherapy, drugs, all those kind of things that go into any modern.
Well, they're probably much better and more easily dealt with in a matrix of compost and microbes and fungi and bacteria, where they either get broken down or they become sort of static. They're not migrating around.
You could train fungi
So
you could basically develop an document with any fungi system by training fungi so essentially that's what you were saying. You've got loads of nutrient sources to begin with, but then you withdraw them, including the chemotherapy drugs, for example, and then you withdraw the other nutrients.
And then fungi will then have to focus on learning how to break that down. So I like the idea, you could develop an inoculant. There's a lovely little business idea for somebody. Work out that inoculant that you could make sure you get very efficient breakdown of human manure. Let's use that word. Because all the other words we use to describe human waste are all kind of ugly words, you know, shite and all that sort of stuff. I try to save those for more adjectives, because we can, you know, well, poo's kind of, it's kind of like sort of childish, but, you know. I hate the word poop. That just does it for me. I always was like, don't like that. So that's not allowed. Sorry about that.
I was privileged to be at
Must have been quite an experience.
Calendar when we changed the compost trailers, the system we had was we just used can buckets.
Yes.
Still made in those days zinc type buckets with a thick roof for a toilet seat.
Right.
So that's what we had in all the certainly staff offices and sort of visitors.
Yes.
And that was just mixed with compost and sawdust.
Yep.
From the We had separate, white gallon cans with funnels.
Okay.
And all men and some of the women used
those for urine collection.
We were measuring actually. We were putting on the calendar when we changed. We did, we took a whole bucket out, or 5 litre can or whatever, and the system we had was those large plastic
IBC type things.
And things like that, or through big plastic oil barrels. And we'd fill one of those, and once that was full, the date was written on it, and generally gave them 2 years or so.
Okay.
They got them too close together because they got hot.
Wow.
And but we had Liverpool School of Tropical Medicine because it was being partly developed and taught as a BSO volunteers.
Yeah.
And it being sort of disseminated as a sensible method for toilet systems.
Yeah.
And they were doing quite sophisticated assessments.
Right.
Whether particular things were killed off or not, even to the point of inoculating some of our barrels with things that were known nasties.
Yes.
Following them and testing them.
See whether they reoccurred and.
Not ways that you could do it instantly. But it's an interesting thing on whether anything that's coming through that we want it to be there in the first place.
Yes.
Contraceptives or
no, that is a
ever monitored actually.
Yeah.
But we were told it was deemed safe enough to put on lettuce.
Right, okay. All right, so that is good. I mean, we were always told.
There's an education thing as well as the fact that care and stuff, because like young women are made aware that they can get pregnant about 9 days a month, and that actually if you're wearing that as alternatives.
Yeah.
Obviously, the pay is better than teenage girls getting pregnant. You can't do that.
We don't know what the day it is.
But there are apps now. There are apps, and you can have on your phone that take your temperature and all that.
Yeah.
So they are actually quite reliable.
I mean.
Especially if you've got a Fitbit or whatever.
Oh, okay. So it's a thing on your watch that takes your pulse. So it takes. Okay. So okay, you got one.
Wow.
So yeah, so you know when you're ovulating or whatever, or.
I think it's a
I
whole.
was a bit concerned about your preoccupation with other women's Fitbits.
Okay, let's.
Kay has just made a comment. She says, I have a compost glue based on Jenkins' pocket system.
Yes, we're coming to that. Yes.
I have a separate compost chickens running cocotails if people are interested.
Great.
I remember when DA2, I think they started a new composting system in the noughties. And I had a friend visiting, we were going up there, and we popped into Dulles to see some way, and they said they were telling us that about the flies, because it's like 1 year the whole place was enveloped.
I remember that year.
Yeah.
It was experimentation.
I mean, there's a lot of learning. And so the thing is, I mean, to roll the story back, is once you've broken the kitsch factor, and once you've understood the potentials of risks and not risks, you can kind of have a lot of fun. There's a lot of experimentation to be done. Let's just go back to this diagram and just a couple of other little points is, this chamber needs to be light free. And you don't want to allow flies access into it because they'll breed, obviously, and there was nothing more off-putting than opening your compost toilet seat and then a swarm of flies coming out. The way that you would do that is you exclude light. You might then, and also you'll notice as a vent pipe here. So again, it creates some warmth, it creates humidity, and that humidity then will evaporate off and can leave, maybe take any potential if there was odors. But also then that creates a single piece of light. So if there is a fly, it does get in there, it will be attracted to that light, and you obviously put a grill in the end of it, and the flies get trapped. I've seen systems with a little, like a milk bottle kind of thing, stuffed in through the slat as well. So single point of light will attract, if flies do get in there, that they're very quickly removed as well. So
You tend to have a draft up through it as well, because the heat.
yes.
That's the natural airflow is up through that.
So you've got a convection current, a little bit of wind flow going across there as well, and so it's actually transporting away a lot of the liquids.
That air can only come in through the toilet seat as well. So
Yeah.
it's tending to stop snows coming up.
Goes around. Yes, you've got a convection current going that way round. So again, so it's a very important sort of detail. So toilet seats, like the ones that we use, they've got little buttons on them, haven't they? So they're not light closing. So often you have maybe a box lid or something like that. And that little attention to detail makes a very significant difference. So you can see here where this is sort of built into a hillside, so you can access the chamber. So maybe it looks something like this one. This is out of Joseph Jenkins' book. But maybe you haven't got the opportunity. Maybe you do it on the flat, so you just raise the commode up, have that as a sort of another setup. Just depends on, look, here's one where it's in the basement of a house. So the eco cabins at COT, they had a sort of a training centre, a residential centre, where the compost toilet was like that. So you can have it on the inside, and then it's accessible from the outside downstairs. And a fun, interesting thing they used to do. So eco cabins, it was a residential facility where kids could come, or any age people obviously, and experience their relationship with the environment. One of the things that they did, that was very interesting, was they decoupled the facility from the mains. Not that there is mains at CAT, but decoupled it from a tap. So, and there's a big water tank, that's your water for the week. So they'd say to all the kids or the participants, okay, we're going to form a human chain. There's the tap, there's the tank. However many buckets it takes to fill the thing, that's enough water for a week. Then take the children into the building and you say, here are the toilets. Oh, here's the compost toilet. Everybody goes, ooh, yuck, not using that. Kitsch factor kicks in. Let's not even think about toilets. Embarrassing. 2 days into their stay, you've run out of water. But you told us it would last all week. But you just flushed it all down the toilet, didn't you? Then the behavior change comes, because now you've connected people to the consequence of the action. Feedback. I always thought that was a very powerful little thing that Christine McLennan used to impose on visitors.
And then they all died of thirst.
Yeah, right.
Disseminate the information.
Yeah.
And they got composted.
Yeah. So loads of different systems. There's lots of people. Once you've understood the basic biology of the system, you can then work out wonderful contraptions. Look how this has got a rotating chamber within it. So you could have multiple batches, and by the time it's come around, it's, you know, it's all cleared. This one has a solar dryer within it to help accelerate the, you know, to evaporate the moisture. I mean, don't forget, even solid waste, to use a euphemism, is still 70% water. It's not, so very quickly it breaks down, it releases a lot of water anyway. So that's an accelerated system. And here is some we made earlier. This is at Trevlack Farm. And this is toilet waste in sawdust. And there is a really nice compost toilet here, but it's in a staff area because it's accessible to where they make the pies. So that's why we haven't seen it or used it, but it's there. And so, yes, Joseph Jenkins' system. Joseph Jenkins was a real sort of pioneer on researching and writing into dry toilet systems. And I don't know where he lives in America, but he lives in a part of America where the rocks are very close to the surface. So you can't really do the septic tank and soak away system. In fact, there's quite lots of places where that's not very suitable. And if it's in a rural area, they're not going to be on main sewage. So basically, yes, it's the bucket really that Tim was talking about. And you have your container and you have the next bucket ready with, let's say 20% full of sawdust ready. As soon as that one's sort of 2/3, 80% full, you cover the surface with sawdust, put a lid on it, swap the two buckets over. And then as Kay has said, you have a dedicated, look at that. So you can make that look quite usable, quite, and yeah, and oh, I haven't got a picture. I thought I had a picture of our friends at Town of Ron have this system. So some friends of ours had sort of housing co-op in a building that had never been modernized. It only had one tap in it and no toilets. So they stayed with it and they went for a dry composting toilet, which they put outside, and then they created what they call their compost hacienda, but a dedicated place for composting toilet waste. And again, it's very simple. It's soaked into sawdust anyway. They've got basically it's a pallet system, but with chicken wire built into it because they don't want to encourage any kind of possible rodents. And a thick layer of straw. You empty your bucket, cover it with another layer of straw. It's like a lasagna, making up piles. Then you leave it for a year when you get to the top, and it breaks down beautifully. So again, you're capturing nutrients, processing them appropriately, returning them back to the system in a form in which they're now not soluble and not mobile, not going to cause water pollution.
We used to, in Brighton, the rule was you had to, every time you'd go for a human manure, you'd put one or two big scoops of sawdust down, so it never smelled. So every time you went,
so if that's it, when you look inside, you should only really see sawdust.
Yeah, and they captured the things they poured down the sink. They had some tights under the sink, under the end of the greywater usage. So all the oils and things they poured down the sink that wouldn't be able to flow down as water into the water systems, they'd collected in this big ball of like gunk, basically, in these big tights for a while, and they throw that on the same compost heap as the human urine, and that in carbon as well.
Okay, and I just noticed I put a resource on the page as well that goes into a lot more detail, a bit more scientific.
It was, a couple of months ago, Permaculture Wales, they had like a little monthly sort of Zoom get together with somebody speaking and then just networking. And a couple of months ago, they had a lady who lives in Wales she specialises in compost toilets. So she's made her livelihood out of it. Apparently, she's got about 6 different compost toilets in her house. So she's sharing all these different styles. But she was saying that the most valuable resource is actually the urine.
That's what we said. 70% of your nutrients leave you in the form of urine. Yeah. And that's much easier to use. So again, one of Peter Harper's points was, look, if you're on the main sewage system, let them have the poo basically, but let's do something with the urine. Yeah, we can do a lot with the urine. So that's the easy. Again, the sort of idea of going for the easiest win. Yeah. Thank you. Yeah. I thought, here's a nice video of people making compost that Clovis shared with us the other day. So just a short one. Something like they're turning a heap, building a heap. So in Africa, we tend to add more soil to compost systems. I've not seen this before, so so again, think of that cubic meter, that getting a critical size. Oh, okay, there we go. Slightly random, but there we go. Thank you for that, Clovis. I'm trying to remember what else I've got on here. I'll just show this little clip. This is a little bit scary. Oh, why is it? Wait, it's so slow. What's going on there? Uncle Bloom, yeah. I mean, that's the Gulf of Mexico. That's the waters from the Mississippi coming into the Gulf of Mexico. It's so laden with nutrient coming out of the whole of that central farming belt of the States. That's pretty scary. Anyway, sorry, we don't really need to see much of that one. Is our internet being dodgy? I can't quite remember what I posted here now, but so this is a very fine and special thing. I've got more videos around explaining it, but this little graphic helps just to get the hang of it. This is a biological slow sound filter. It's a bio sand filter, biological slow sound filter. And what we have here is a diffuser here where we put in water that we're going to clean. It could be rainwater. So this is very good if you're capturing rainwater and then want to turn it into drinking water. Is that you don't, and in the top of the main functional part of this slow sound filter is this sand layer. So the first thing that to note is when you pour fresh water into it, you don't want to disturb that sand layer. And you pour your water into this diffuser section, so it's got to dribble through like rain, little drops, like a colander. And you have 10 centimeters of maximum of water in the top. I'll double check these measurements. So you have standing water sat, this is what it calls the biological layer. That's standing water that's sitting slightly above the layer of the sand. It's just maybe 5 centimeters, okay? So the reason why it's important that isn't deep is because oxygen will diffuse into that water, and because you've got oxygen-rich water environment. And what happens is on the surface of the sand builds a microbial community, which will then digest and remove any potential pathogens that are in that water. As that water, you want a minimum of 60 centimeters of sand. As that water diffuses down through it, it encourages different kinds of microbial communities. So a bit like when we talked about in the reed beds, that we would have a vertical flow and a lateral flow, and we'd have different arrangements that we create different habitats. That's the same that's happening in here.
What kind of sand?
Sharp sand, the coarse sand. Not necessarily. No, but yeah, you rather than that soft sand that they make mortar out of, you want sharp sand, the stuff that's scratchy and hard. So it has air spaces within it. And again, what happens is you slowly build up a microbial community in the sand that it is, so there's a physical filter, obviously by it's trickling through the sand, but there's also a biological action. And what we've tried with that, as a variation, is to also add a layer of biochar. In fact, sorry, at the bottom, we're at the bottom. And the other consideration then is so as the you then have small gravel and coarse gravel at the bottom, so that the water can drain through it quite freely. The next thing you'll notice is that this pipe, the exit pipe that comes from the bottom, is exactly exits at the height of the biological layer of that standing water. So what that means is, if I put a litre of water in at the top, that litre of water obviously sits in the top of the filter, but it displaces the litre of water that gets pushed out of the other end. And that water will be clean. In fact, that water tastes like spring water. It's extraordinary. They really, really work. I've made different versions out of found materials, but Clovis and some of his training, they in some of the refugee settlements, they'll have a former, and you can pour cement into it and create this thing, you know, as a single item, a single unit.
So how does it go up again? Is it just evaporation condensation?
No, it's water pressure. It's just literally pressure. So the whole thing is full of water. From there all the way to the end of the pipe, it's full of water. So when I add a litre of water in the top, that then goes into it, creates enough pressure to displace a litre of water that comes out the bottom.
I just don't understand how it's large gravel last.
Because it's just so that it doesn't block up, so you get a free flow. The water's clean by then. It's done its job. That's just making it so that the pipe, if you have all the fine sand at the bottom, that'll end up going up your tube, and then you'll block it.
The biological layer, is that what?
That's 5 centimeters of standing water, and on the surface of the sand, you'll get then a film of bacteria will build up. And that bacteria is an active part of the filtering process. And yeah.
So if you put biochar on the bottom, it would still leak from a large gravel, wouldn't it?
Yeah.
What about salty water?
It doesn't work because that would kill the bacteria. And it wouldn't remove the salt.
In parts and functions of the biosand filter. The biggest part of the biosand filter is the container. It can be made of concrete or plastic. The lid protects the inside of the biosand filter from insects and other things.
Mm-hmm.
Starting at the top, the water is poured into the reservoir, then flows through the diffuser. It has many tiny holes to slow the flow of water. Not all biosand filters are the same. Some have diffuser boxes. Others have diffuser plates, like this. Without the diffuser, fast-flowing water will disturb the sand and the biolayer below. Next is a layer of water called standing water. It should be about 5 centimeters deep, about the height of your knuckle. If the standing water is deeper than this, oxygen can't reach the biolayer. And if it's too shallow, the biolayer will dry out and die. If the standing water layer isn't the right depth, be sure to contact the person that installed your filter for help. Below the standing water is the biolayer and the sand. The biolayer is at the top of the sand In the biosand filter, where many microorganisms live,
That is actually
you can't see them because they are too small. The next step under all the sand is the separation gravel. It's a layer of small gravel that is just big enough to stop the sand from settling further down, yet allows water to pass through. At the very bottom of the biosand filter is the drainage gravel, which prevents the separation gravel from blocking the outlet tube. This is where the water flows in, then up the tube, and drips down into a clean container.
Not in boiling.
Wait a second. Make sure you never attach anything to the outlet tube. Much better. Now you know the parts of the biosand filter and what they do.
There we go, with a happy little tune as well.
The water that comes out is not into boiling.
No,
So literally just gravel can filter any water or anything.
it's not just the sand, it's not just the sand and the gravel, but it's also the microbes. You could have other like heavy metal contaminants and things like that, you wouldn't be able to, that would not remove it. Essentially, this is for treating, I mean, rainwater to turn it into drinking water, but it freshens it. It tastes like spring water when it comes out. It really is very different from what goes in. So somehow it's changed the nature of it.
CO2 water is through a sand filter for a long time, and it's still in.
Yeah, so the water system from at CAT was rainwater that went through a slow sand filter, and then it was UV treated to give it an extra layer of protection. So let's say if we were in a public health situation, we might have the UV filter. But if we're in a survival situation, refugee situation, displaced people situation, that's like many multiples better than drinking standing water. Even where Paul lives in Kenya, there's a lot of settlement there. There's no.
On the roof of the earthship, there was gravel and sand.
Right.
When the water came in,
Mhm.
through the system of the house.
Can you put standing water into it, or does it just have to be recently let to drain with?
No, it can be sat. I mean, it can be stuff that's sat in a rainwater catchment thing for months. I mean,
Yeah, so like those adverts on the telly where you see the children
yeah.
use that water to really.
How's it? Where's the energy coming from to compress it through?
Gravity.
But surely it has to be sealed off to like that's like a lid for it to be the water.
It's not airtight though.
So,
So otherwise you get a vacuum. So what it is that it's like a full vessel. Imagine that, it's completely full with water. So when you add, well, however, you add a pint of water, then that displaces a pint of water.
Does it not just flow out of the top?
No, it flows because of the way it's set up, it flows out of the pipe.
If you think about watering can, you fill up the water in the can, don't you? You put it in the bottom of it, but then you compete.
Hmm.
The spout goes up the spout.
It's got to be full on in the tank side, higher than the water to come out.
When I did my field work, I bought, when we out the van type shops, I bought, it was like a little pump which was lined with clay. And so I put the tube in like the water that I got from the well, and then you just sort of had to pump it, and then got the water
It
through
pads
that,
and
and then come out, and I wasn't sick at all in the whole year I was there.
Does the water have to go uphill? Is that a factor? The pipe that goes up at the end, the little pipe that comes out.
It pads and functions.
That's right. But let's go back to the schematic here. Okay. So this system is now, this is completely full with water, right the way to here. Right? Even the pipe's got sunny water in it, got water in it. So when we add some from above, that water pressure, we've built up a little bit of extra pressure here, so it just pushes it out. It displaces the same amount.
Is there a reason the pipe has to go up, wouldn't the pipe just be like an outlet at the bottom?
No, because it's setting then it would drain out and it wouldn't be full of water, you'd empty it. It goes back up to that height, that sets the internal water level. And as the lady said in the thing, is you've got to have 5 centimeters of water standing, otherwise your bacterial community, biological community will dry out.
Presumably you have to look after it quite well then, so you have to top it up quite quickly.
I was actually going to show you how to maintain your slow sand filter video.
It's like a bit like looking after an animal, isn't it? Because it is a living
Yeah, you're maintaining a
organism.
population of
How to do a swell and dump.
swirl and dump.
That's what you do if the water is flowing much slower than usual from the biosand filter. First, take off the lid, then pour water into the filter until it's above the level of the diffuser. Once the water is at this level, take out the diffuser. Stick your hand into the filter until your hand is flat on the sand. Swirl the surface of the sand around 3 times. Then scoop out the dirty water with a cup or bucket. Make the top of the sand flat and level. Wash the diffuser and lid with soapy water and rinse. Put the diffuser back into the filter. And then wash your hands with soap. This is very important since your hands have just touched all the pathogens on the surface of the sand. Then pour a bucket of water into the filter and check to see how fast it comes out. If the filter is still running too slow, do all of these steps again. Congratulations! Now you know how to do the swirl and dump.
I hope you remember that now, the swirl and dump. It's just, so you could improvise that. It's not complicated, and okay, it's a nice manufactured thing, but you could see you could improvise that quite easily out of found materials. Sand's pretty ubiquitous. When we made one in the refugee settlement, and what I found, you have to wash the sand quite a lot, and then even then, when you start using it, it takes a few days. Every time I put water in, it would come out kind of muddy. So I thought I'd try an experience. I've just put the same water through the system, and after about 5 or 6 times, it just started coming out crystal clear. Because obviously it's self-filtering. So you've got to wash all the nasties or the muck or any, particulates through. But once it's done that, you can literally see the quality of the water improving. Yeah.
So, I mean, if you buy like that one, has it got microorganisms already in it? Or, and if you make your own, is there a time, you have to wait a certain amount of time for it to...
Yeah, I mean, what I did was I just had the same bucket of water and I cycled it through a few times. And I found I was getting muck, even though we'd washed the sand quite a lot, still was kind of muddy. And but after 4 or 5 times, it started coming out really clear. I think it's supposed to be like a week or something like that. I think it is. You got to, because it's a biological process, you got to allow that to build up. Yeah. And the second one it's saying is ultimately you might end up with a film on the top so that it's not so porous. And then they're just suggesting usually just swirl and dump. But yeah, mix it up a little bit. Maybe put a bit of fresh sand on the top, and then you'll find that it'll work again. So you can also get these things. We have like a porous pot system. It's like a big, almost like a flower pot sitting in the top of a water thing, and you just pour water in it. And what it is, they've made a clay plot, but they've incorporated sawdust powder into the mixture. And then when they've fired it, the sawdust has been burnt off. So you've got a very, so it increases the porosity of the pot. And then we found, and so that also was operated as a sort of like a biological filter. We were using it on a PDC in Uganda, but we found like after a week or so of continual use by lots of people, it slowed right down, and that was for the same kind of reason of what they're talking about there. When I was transporting it to the next teaching venue, we broke the pot and it cracked, and I thought, oh damn, we've broken it. And then I thought, haha, I've got an idea. So we smashed it up into little pieces and then made a layer of it in the slow sand filter. And we realized actually you're still getting exactly the same effect from the pot, but now it's in pieces. It still worked. So that was interesting too, I thought. Okay, I've messed the timing up, haven't I? So should we have our break now? And it's good because I've kind of run out of exactly what I was doing. So we'll take our 30-minute break now, come back at 12:30 and we'll have another hour. Okay, so sorry for messing up the time. We will